What's going on, everybody? Mortem here. Today we are talking about some of the updates that October brought for Baldur's Gate 3, and it was a very big month for the game. Now, if you're unaware, I usually make these monthly videos just kind of recapping all of the changes that happened for the early access period, and I will say this particular month I did cover quite a bit extra. I went over patch 6, which launched this month, actually ran through the game on a live stream with the new patch, which added the new sorcerer class. So I've talked about patch 6 pretty extensively, so I'm just going to give the highlights, and then we'll talk about the hotfixes that also released this month, and just a couple little things here and there as well. So patch 6 was a very, very large patch that did a lot of things for early access that were very good. So obviously it added the new sorcerer class, like I already mentioned. It changed up the lighting quite a bit, as well as added like dirt and grime and things to characters. So when characters are in battle and they're losing health, they actually kind of look roughed up to further show that off, which honestly the lighting changes and the changes to the character models in response to damage really does a lot to add a bit of a darker tone to the game. And for me, it's definitely a very welcome change, as before this, characters tended to look a little too shiny, so to speak, and a little too whimsical in some ways. In addition, we also saw the new Grimforge area added to the game, which is a fun little area with some puzzles and things, as well as a few quest lines to sort out, as well as some big mechanical boss fights, which I thought were especially interesting because I think that kind of shows you what they have in store later in terms of like mechanics and fights and everything waiting for you in the later parts of the game. And overall, Grimforge is just a very cool area of the game so far. In addition, they also added weapon actions, so anyone wielding a melee weapon or a bow or something like that will now get a few extra actions that make using those feel a little more unique. That you can use actions that will convey a status effect to the enemy depending on which one you used, and kind of just adds a little more variety to the more physical combat side of things. And if you want to know more about patch 6, like I mentioned, I have actually talked about it more extensively in other videos, which is why I'm not going to go over too much of it here. And now I want to talk about the hotfixes. So hotfix 16 was actually a pretty large hotfix. Fixed up a lot of the crashes and things that we've seen up to this point, but it also fixed up quite a few other things, such as certain types of damage coming from items not actually working properly, torches in a certain location not being equipable, NPCs just not doing anything on their turn, as well as fixing up some quest logic and quite a few other things. And if anything, the surprising thing about hotfix 16 was just the size of it. It's pretty unusual for a hotfix to be that big, especially for this particular game. Previously, most of the hotfixes have been aimed at fixing crashes and things. And then afterwards, that was followed by, of course, hotfix 17. This was smaller in scope, but fixed some important bugs. For instance, Lae'zel was no longer romanceable for some reason, so they had to fix that. And then a bug I personally encountered was fixed with this hotfix in my live stream, actually. My character bugged out and everything he touched would take bludgeoning damage, which was apparently a more widespread thing than I realized. So they actually fixed that with this hotfix as well. Another big one that I encountered personally that this hotfix fixed was the attacks of opportunities from enemies proccing when they shouldn't. There were a few times during my live stream playthrough when I was like, I didn't feel like that NPC should have gotten an attack of opportunity. Apparently that was an issue that this hotfix aimed to address, as well as the standard few crashes and things. Now, overall, this patch and these hotfixes were just a huge step in the right direction for the game. I think this particular patch went a long way towards kind of showing people that they are dedicated to making this game feel unique and responding to player feedback. And in an interview, they actually recently mentioned that the release window that they're shooting for is the end of 2022, which I think makes sense, though I do think the burnout for the early access is starting to affect some people, as early access tends to be a bit of a fine line for a lot of people between actually trying to help with things like bugs as opposed to a game just staying in early access too long and people feeling like the developers are just milking money out of it. Now, I don't think that's the case here. I think they just want to get this particular game right personally, which I honestly think is the right move myself, but I can understand where some people are coming from in that regard. But nonetheless, the release window is towards the end of 2022. Again, that might change. That is very tentative, but that is currently the goal they are shooting for. And I think this patch really kind of definitely advanced what I've seen enough in the game to think that that's definitely doable. And while there are certain to be things that they want to surprise us with on launch day as opposed to actually putting them in early access for us to test, there are things that I at the very least hope they test before the game goes live, because you got to understand anything that isn't in the early access on launch day is likely to have much more bugs than what was in early access, which is a very common thing that you'll see happen. For instance, Wrath of the Righteous, which recently launched about 2 months ago now, the first 4 acts of the game, which were pretty heavily beta tested, did very well. Act 4 a little less so than the others, but for the most part it was a much better experience than Acts 5 and the end of the game, which is Act 6. Those, which were not beta tested at all, at least by players in the beta, had a much rockier start, and I'm afraid that that experience is probably going to repeat itself when BG3 does launch, and because of that, I at the very least hope that they take the time to test the important stuff in early access, like all of the classes that they plan on adding, as well as the companions. So if you're unaware, when the game actually launches, you should be able to play as the companions. For instance, if you want to play the game as Astarion, that should be an option. And my concern is as EA goes on, they haven't actually given us the option to do that yet. And I'm worried about some of the logic and stuff not working out properly if you're playing as a certain person. Now, I'm hoping just from the companions being accessible that will allow them to work out most of the problems, but playing those characters by being one of those characters is a very different experience. So things like that, I honestly hope they take the time to test properly, because that's something someone would start up, and if it's a bad experience, you're unfortunately not really going to get a chance to make a second impression on that person most of the time. So as we approach the coming months and the patches yet to come, I really hope they start testing some of that more important stuff. Again, like the other classes mainly would be my big thing, but kind of just in general as well. So there you go, guys. There's an update on the BG3 Early Access in the month of October. Happy belated Halloween, by the way. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.